The first time she said it, she didn't raise her voice. She leaned in like she was about to tell me a secret and said, "If you wanted me, say it now." I laughed, too fast, too loud, and pretended it was a joke she hadn't meant. But the truth is, I've been replaying the way she said now ever since. I met her at the repair shop where I'd been working 6 months longer than I planned to. The kind of place that smells like dust and hot metal, radios always tuned a little off station. She came in on a Tuesday afternoon with a printer that looked heavier than it should have been. I remember because she didn't ask for help. She carried it herself, set it on the counter, and only then looked up at me like she was assessing something. Not the shop, not the damage. Me. She was older, mid-40s at least. Not in a way that felt distant or tired. In a way that felt finished. Like she knew where to stand, how long to pause before speaking, when to smile, and when not to bother. Her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands already giving up and brushing her cheek. No rush in her movements. No apology in her posture. "I think it's dead," she said, tapping the side of the printer with one finger. "But everyone tells me you can bring things back." I shrugged, suddenly aware of how young I probably sounded when I spoke. "Sometimes." She smiled then. Not wide. Just enough. Her name was Nadia. She said it like she expected me to remember it, and I did. She came back 2 days later, then again the next week, for a different reason that didn't really make sense. Each time, she stayed a little longer. Asked questions she didn't need answers to. Watched my hands while I worked, like she was learning something useful, even though we both knew she wasn't. Once, she brought coffee. Not for the counter. Just for me. Set it down beside my elbow without asking what I liked. "You looked tired last time," she said. I didn't know what to say to that. No one usually noticed things like that. I muttered thanks and took a sip even though it was too hot. She watched me burn my tongue and smiled like she'd expected it. There were moments, small ones, that felt heavier than they should have. When she brushed past me in the narrow aisle and didn't apologize. When our hands touched over a receipt and neither of us pulled back right away. When the shop went quiet for a second, like the room itself was waiting to see what we'd do. The day she said it, the printer was fixed. She didn't need to be there anymore. She stood across from me, closer than necessary, her bag hanging from one shoulder. "So," she said, dragging the word out. "That's it, I guess." "Yeah," I said. "All set." She tilted her head. Studied me. I felt suddenly like I was failing a test I hadn't studied for. Then she leaned in. Not all the way. Just enough that I could smell her perfume. Something warm, not sweet. Her voice dropped, steady as anything. "If you wanted me," she said, "say it now." I froze. Every answer I had lined up ran straight into each other and disappeared. I told myself she was teasing. That I was imagining things. That people like her didn't mean things like that. So I laughed. And she straightened up, nodded once, like she'd confirmed something for herself. She left with the printer under her arm, walking just a little slower than before. I watched the door swing shut behind her and realized my coffee had gone cold, and that I'd already decided this was the moment I wouldn't stop thinking about. The second time I saw her outside the shop, it wasn't planned. At least not on my end. I was leaving late. Again, tools still humming in my ears, my hands smelling like oil no matter how much I scrubbed. The sky had already slipped into that dull gray that pretends it might rain, but never quite does. She was standing by her car across the street, hood up, phone pressed to her ear, not saying anything. I slowed without meaning to. She saw me before I crossed over. Her mouth tightened just a little, like she hadn't decided yet whether to be relieved or annoyed. "Car trouble?" I asked stupidly. She ended the call and let her arm drop. "Battery," she said. "Or the universe. Hard to tell lately." I offered to look. She hesitated, just a second too long. That was new. Before, she'd never hesitated around me. She'd stepped into my space like she belonged there. Now she folded her arms, then unfolded them, like she was trying to remember how boundaries worked. "I don't want to keep you," she said. "You're not," I said, and meant more than the words. We worked mostly in silence. The kind that isn't empty, just crowded. I could feel her watching me again, but this time it was different. Like she was trying not to. Her hands were clasped tight in front of her, fingers worrying at a ring she kept twisting and untwisting. Her nails were short, practical. One of them was chipped. You do this a lot, she asked finally. Help strangers. Only the ones who look like they might throw the hood down and walk away, I said. She laughed, quick and soft, then stopped herself like she'd said too much. When she looked away, I caught it, the tiredness. Not the dramatic kind. The kind that sits behind the eyes when someone's been holding things together for too long. Things okay? I asked before I could stop myself. She stiffened. Not angry. Guarded. They're fine, she said. Then, after a beat, they have to be. The engine turned over on the first try. I straightened up, wiped my hands on a rag that was already ruined. She didn't say thank you right away. Just stood there, watching the hood settle closed, like the sound meant something more. I shouldn't, she started. Stopped. Pressed her lips together. I waited. I didn't rush her. I'd learned that about her already. She needed space to decide what she was allowed to say. She exhaled slowly. I'm not always great at stopping things early, she said. That's a flaw. Not a warning. Just information. I nodded, though I didn't fully understand. Or maybe I understood too well. She reached out then, almost absent-mindedly, and brushed a smudge of grease off my wrist with her thumb. The touch was brief, light, but it stayed. Thank you, she said. This time, it sounded like she meant something else. As she drove off, headlights cutting through the gray, I realized my arm was still lifted where she'd touched me, and I let it stay there a second longer than necessary. It happened late, on a night that felt unfinished. The shop was closed, lights mostly off except the back room where I was inventorying parts one already knew by heart. Rain had started without committing to it, just enough to darken the pavement, to make the windows hum softly when a car passed. I heard the door before I saw her. The bell rang once, hesitant, like she wasn't sure she should be there. She stood just inside, coat still on, hair damp around the edges. She looked smaller somehow, tired in a way she hadn't let herself be before. I hope this isn't weird, she said. It's fine, I said too quickly, then corrected myself. Yeah, it's fine. She smiled at that, but it didn't quite land. She followed me into the back room, the space suddenly too narrow, the air smelling faintly of metal and old coffee. She leaned against the counter instead of sitting, arms folded again. Guarded. Watching. I needed something fixed, she said, nodding at the box she'd brought. But that's not really why I came. I waited. I was getting good at that. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen, face tightening in a way that didn't look like annoyance. More like history. She didn't answer it. Let it buzz itself quiet. You don't have to. I started. I know, she said. Sometimes it's easier to be somewhere no one expects anything from you. That landed harder than it should have. I focused on opening the box, on giving my hand something to do. She watched me again, closer this time. I could feel it. When I looked up, she didn't look away. You ever feel like you're standing too close to something? She asked. Like if you move even a little, it'll tip. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was answering the right question. Her laugh came out soft, uneven. I shouldn't be saying this. But you are, I said. She pushed off the counter, took a step closer. Not touching, just enough that the space between us changed. I noticed the way her fingers trembled when she tucked them into her sleeves. The faint line at the corner of her mouth where she worried at it. My life's complicated, she said, and I don't get to be careless anymore. I wanted to tell her I understood, that I wouldn't make it harder, that I already was. Instead, I stayed quiet. Her phone buzzed again. She sighed, looked at it, then at me. I should take this, she said. She didn't move. Okay, I said. My voice didn't match the word. She reached out, then stopped herself, her hand hovering near my arm, close enough that I felt the heat of it. Her thumb brushed my sleeve, barely there. For the record, she said softly, I don't regret coming here. Neither did I. She turned away to answer the call, and I stood there with my breath caught halfway in, wondering what would have happened if the phone hadn't rung, and why my body was already leaning toward the space she'd just left. It didn't happen right away. The silence, It took a few days to arrive, thick and deliberate, like something that had decided to sit between us. She stopped coming by the shop. No coffee. No excuses about broken things. I told myself that was the responsible outcome. That this was what restraint looked like. Still, I caught myself watching the door whenever it opened, like I'd trained my body to expect her. Then one evening, just before closing, she was there. No coat this time. No smile either. She stood by the counter with her hands flat against it, like she needed the surface to stay upright. The shop lights hummed overhead. Everything felt louder because neither of us spoke. "I didn't mean to disappear," she said finally. Her voice was calm, but it didn't sound steady. "I just needed to know if I could." I nodded. It felt like the only safe movement left. She took a breath and looked at me, not the careful, measuring look she usually wore. This one was bare, almost annoyed at itself. "This isn't normal," she said, "and I keep pretending it is." I leaned back against the shelf behind me, suddenly aware of how close she was. Close enough that if either of us moved wrong, it would mean something. "We haven't done anything," I said. It sounded like a defense, or a plea. "That's not the point," she replied. "Doing isn't the problem. Thinking is." The words settled heavy in the room. She paced once, slow, then stopped in front of me again. Her eyes flicked to my mouth and away. "That didn't feel accidental. I catch myself adjusting my day for you," she said. "I tell myself it's convenience. It's not. I rehearse conversations that never happen. I leave things unfinished just in case I see you." She laughed quietly, without humor. "I'm too old to be doing that." I swallowed. My chest felt tight, like I'd been holding something in without noticing. "I don't know what you want me to say," I admitted. She nodded, like that answer hurt less than a different one might have. "I don't either. That's the problem." She reached up, rubbed her forehead, then let her hand drop. It hovered between us for a second before falling back to her side. "This is the part where someone's supposed to draw a line," she said. "And I don't know if I trust myself to do it." I wanted to tell her I would, that I could be the responsible one. But the truth was, I didn't want to be. I wanted to stand exactly where I was and let the quiet stretch until it told us what to do. She looked at me then, really looked, like she was asking a question she was afraid to hear answered. "If nothing changes," she said softly, "do you think we'll forgive ourselves for it later?" Neither of us moved, and the silence that followed felt louder than if one of us had reached out. It wasn't a confession the way I'd imagined confessions were supposed to sound. No build-up, no dramatic pause, just a small truth dropped into the middle of an ordinary moment, like it had been waiting there the whole time. She came by on her lunch break. I knew because she checked her watch twice in the first minute, like time was something she couldn't afford to lose but had already spent. She brought a folder this time. Paper. Actual paper. That alone felt deliberate. "I need you to look at something," she said. We sat at the small desk in the back, knees almost touching. She slid the folder toward me, but didn't let go right away. Her fingers stayed on the edge, pressing down, then lifting, then pressing again. "I don't usually show people this," she said. "So don't make it into something it's not." I opened it anyway. Inside was a photograph, slightly bent at one corner. A younger version of her stood in the frame, hair shorter, smile less careful. Her arm was around a man I didn't recognize. He looked relaxed in a way I wasn't sure I ever had. His hand rested on her shoulder like it belonged there. "That was a long time ago," she said, watching my face more than the picture. "Who is he?" I asked. She exhaled. "The one I didn't leave when I should have. The one who taught me how quiet heartbreak can be." I looked back at the photo, at the way her body leaned toward him without hesitation. "He died," she added. Not dramatically, just fact. I didn't say I was sorry. It felt wrong, like a word too small for what she was actually telling me. "He was younger than me," she continued. "Everyone thought it was a phase. They kept waiting for me to come to my senses." She smiled faintly. "I did. Just too late to save anything." Something shifted in my chest then. Not jealousy. Understanding. She took the photo back, slid it into the folder, then hesitated. Instead of closing it, she pulled out another thing. A folded piece of paper, edges worn thin. "A voicemail transcript," she said. "From him." I kept it because I deleted the actual message and panicked afterward. She didn't read it aloud, just held it between us like proof of something unfinished. "You don't sound like him," she said suddenly. "That's not it." She looked at me, eyes steady. "You make me feel like I'm standing right before a decision, like I still get to choose who I am next." I didn't trust myself to answer. My throat felt tight, my hands useless. She gathered the papers, slower than necessary, then stood. When she reached the door, she stopped. I don't know what this means, she said, without turning around. But I know it isn't an accident. She left then, and I stayed seated longer than I needed to, staring at the empty chair across from me, realizing the shift hadn't been about the past at all, but about what she was suddenly letting herself imagine again. It didn't feel like a moment you'd circle on a calendar. No music to cue it. No sudden certainty. Just a slow giving in to something that had already been happening for a while. She showed up near closing again, rain this time actually committing. Her hair was damp, curling at the ends like it didn't care what she'd planned for it. She didn't bring anything to fix. That felt important. I don't have long, she said. Not apologetic. Just honest. We didn't go to the back room. We stayed near the front, lights half off, the shop reflected faintly in the glass. Outside, cars hissed past on wet pavement. Inside, everything felt paused. I've been trying to name what this is, she said, so I can put it where it belongs. And? I asked. She shook her head. It doesn't want to be named. That made me smile a little. She noticed. Her mouth curved in response, then stilled, like she was afraid of encouraging something she'd already decided not to stop. I'm not confused about you, she said. I'm confused about myself around you. I leaned against the counter. I didn't step closer. I didn't step away either. I don't want to be another thing you regret, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. Not searching, considering. You're not, she said. You're the thing that happens after. That landed softly, harder than anything dramatic could have. She sat on the stool by the window, shoulders dropping like she'd been holding them up all day. I joined her without asking, close but not touching. Our knees brushed. Neither of us moved them away. We sat like that for a while, just breathing, listening to the rain and the old clock ticking above the door. I noticed the way she rubbed her thumb along the seam of her sleeve, over and over. After a minute, I covered her hand with mine. Not gripping, just there. She didn't flinch, didn't pull back. She turned her hand instead, letting our palms meet properly. Her skin was warm, slightly rough, like mine. This doesn't fix anything, she said quietly. I know, and it might complicate things. Probably. She nodded, then leaned her forehead against my shoulder. Not dramatic, just tired, like she'd finally found a place to rest for a second. We stayed that way until the rain slowed, until the silence stopped feeling like a question. When she stood to leave, she squeezed my hand once, small, deliberate. I'm not asking you to wait, she said. I'm not, I replied. She smiled at that. Real this time. She walked out into the damp evening, and I locked up behind her, knowing nothing had been promised, and that somehow, that made what we'd chosen feel solid enough to stand on. I'm telling this from a little distance now. Not years, just enough time for the sharp edges to dull, for the quiet to settle into something I can sit with without flinching. She still comes by the shop. Not like before. No excuses, no lingering that pretends it's accidental. Sometimes we talk. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes she just stands there while I finish what I'm doing, and that's enough. What changed wasn't the closeness, it was the honesty. We stopped borrowing moments we wouldn't acknowledge later. I learned something in the aftermath of all that quiet tension. Love, if that's even the right word, doesn't always announce itself with certainty. Sometimes it shows up as restraint, as choosing not to rush, as sitting beside someone and letting the silence say what neither of you is ready to promise. She taught me that wanting someone doesn't mean taking from them. It means seeing the weight they're already carrying and deciding not to add to it. It means understanding that timing isn't an obstacle, it's part of the story. And I changed too. I stopped confusing intensity with depth. I learned that being seen isn't about being chosen loudly. Sometimes it's about being trusted quietly, about being someone a person can rest near without feeling like they owe you anything. There was a moment, weeks later, when we locked up together and stood outside under the streetlight. The air was cool, ordinary. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder and looked at me the way she always does now. Steady, unguarded, not asking. You okay? She asked. I nodded. And I was. She didn't lean in this time. Didn't test the space between us. She just squeezed my arm once, brief and familiar, then walked away. and I watched her go without that old ache in my chest. No wondering. No unfinished sentence chasing after her. What we had didn't turn into something dramatic. It didn't need to. It became something better, realistic, mutual, grounded in choice instead of impulse. Something earned by all the pauses we didn't rush through. If I've learned anything, it's this. The moments that stay with you aren't always the ones where something happens. Sometimes they're the ones where something almost does, and you're changed anyway. And every now and then, when the shop is quiet and the light hits the counter just right, I think back to the first time she leaned close and said, "If you wanted me, say it now." I didn't. But somehow, we still heard each other. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?